At 36 years old, Calix Washington made $89,000 a year operating a gantry crane at the port of New Orleans. It was a good living, an honest one, built on skill, precision, and a healthy respect for the immense weight of the world he moved every day. This morning, however, the most devastating weight was not a 40-ton shipping container swaying precariously in the humid Louisiana air, but the silent, crushing presence of a pair of men's shoes in his own entryway. They were brown leather Cole Haans, a popular style he'd seen in department stores, probably a size 11 or 12. They cost about $150, and they were not his. He was supposed to be in Houston until Friday. The annual Gulfports Logistics Conference was a mandatory trip, a blur of PowerPoint presentations in the freezing ballroom of a 4-star Hyatt, followed by networking events with lukewarm coffee. He hated it. He always feigned a last-minute project delay at the port to cut it short, usually arriving home a day early to surprise his wife, Tia. This year, the conference keynote had been so mind-numbingly dull, a droning lecture on RFID optimization, that he'd slipped out after the first session, hopped in his Ford F-150, and driven the 5 hours back to New Orleans through the night. He'd imagined her smile, the way her eyes would light up. He pictured surprising her with coffee and beignets from Café du Monde. Instead, at 6:32 a.m. on a Wednesday morning, he stood frozen on the threshold of his own life. The air in their Garden District home, a beautiful shotgun double they'd bought 3 years ago for $750,000, felt thick and wrong. It carried a faint alien scent, a cloying, spicy cologne that was decidedly not the clean, simple soap he used. And there, sitting neatly on the antique mahogany shoe rack he had painstakingly stripped and refinished himself, were the shoes. A stranger's shoes, a man's shoes. The sight of them was more violent than a punch, more final than a slammed door. They were an invoice for a debt he hadn't known he owed, a quiet declaration that the life he'd left behind on Monday was not the one he had come home to. He had been a crane operator for 15 years. He knew how to calculate load, stress, and breaking points. In that single, silent moment, every support structure in his world failed at once. The life Calix and Tia had built was, on the surface, a portrait of modern black success in the South. He was the steady, blue-collar bedrock. She was the vibrant, ambitious socialite. Their love story had begun 10 years prior, a chance meeting at the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Festival. He was captivated by her laugh, a bright musical thing that cut through the thick, festive air. Her luminous, deep brown skin glowed under the April sun. She had told him she loved that he was a man who built things, who worked with his hands. He loved that she was a woman who seemed to build worlds with her words, her connections, her effortless charm. They dated for 3 years before he proposed on the St. Charles streetcar, the antique trolley rattling past the grand mansions of the Garden District. He'd presented her not with a massive, ostentatious diamond, but a simple, elegant sapphire ring that cost him $3,000, a full month's salary at the time. It was the exact color of her favorite dress. She had cried and said it was perfect. Their wedding was a small, beautiful affair at a botanical garden, surrounded by friends and family. His side was mostly port workers and their families, solid people with calloused hands and warm smiles. Her side was a collection of artists, nonprofit directors, and boutique owners, people who spoke of gallery openings and fundraising galas. Calix felt a little out of place among them, but Tia's hand in his was a constant, warm anchor. Their first home was a modest rental in the Bywater, but Tia had her eyes set on the Garden District. "It's not just a house, Calix," she'd said, scrolling through listings on her $1,300 MacBook Air. "It's an investment. It's a statement about where we're going." He was hesitant. The $750,000 price tag felt like an anchor that could pull them both under. His own father had worked at the same port, raising 3 kids in a small but paid-for house in Gentilly. His financial philosophy was simple: don't owe anyone anything you can't pay back tomorrow. But Tia was persuasive. She drew up budgets, showed him projections, and painted a picture of a life filled with garden parties and influential neighbors. "This is our future, baby," she'd whispered, her head on his chest. He had relented. He loved her, and he wanted her to be happy. They secured the mortgage, draining a significant portion of his carefully managed retirement savings for the $150,000 down payment. The house became Tia's masterpiece. She had an eye for design, he had to admit. She filled the double parlor living room with expensive modern furniture from a boutique on Magazine Street that probably cost more than his truck, a 2015 Ford F-150. With 150,000 miles on it that was paid in full. There was a sleek white leather sofa that cost $6,000 and an abstract painting that was mostly just a single, aggressive red slash on a white canvas, for which she'd paid $2,000 at a charity auction. Calix didn't understand the art, but he understood the pride in Tia's eyes when her friends came over and gasped with admiration. Her spending became a quiet, constant hum in the background of their marriage. A $2,400 Burberry trench coat appeared in the closet. "It's a classic, Calix. It will last forever." A $5,000 Peloton bike was installed in the spare bedroom. "It's for our health, baby. We have to invest in ourselves." He'd nod, looking at his simple $89 Timex watch, the one with the cracked face he'd had for 10 years, and wonder if they lived in the same financial reality. But his $89,000 salary was direct deposited into their joint account every 2 weeks, and the bills were always paid. He trusted her. He trusted her to manage their shared dream. His life was the port. The smell of diesel and salt water, the screech of metal on metal, the camaraderie with the other operators in the break room. He found a deep satisfaction in the work, in the feeling of lifting a 40-ton box from the deck of a ship as if it were a child's toy and setting it down gently on a waiting truck chassis. From his cab, 200 feet in the air, the world was a logical, orderly place. Everything had a system, a procedure. You followed the rules, you stayed focused, and everyone went home safe. The contrast between his world and hers was stark. He'd come home, his work boots caked with grime, smelling of the industrial waterfront, and find her dressed for a gallery opening in a $400 dress, smelling of a perfume that cost more than his weekly grocery bill. "Don't you want to come?" she'd ask. "You should meet these people." In the beginning, he tried. He'd put on his one good suit, a $700 offering from a department store, and stand awkwardly in a room full of people discussing postmodernism and the merits of a new biodynamic wine bar. He felt like an exhibit himself, Tia's crane operator husband. They'd look at his hands, broad and calloused, and their eyes would glaze over with a kind of polite disinterest. After a while, he stopped going. "You go have fun, babe," he'd say, kissing her cheek. "Tell me all about it when you get home." And she would, her stories a whirlwind of names he didn't know and places he'd never been. He thought it was their arrangement, their balance. He was the foundation. She was the beautiful facade. He had no idea the foundation was just there to be looted. The most poignant symbol of their diverging paths sat dormant in the smallest bedroom. It was supposed to be a nursery. When they first bought the house, they'd talked endlessly about children. Calix wanted a son to teach how to fish, a daughter to carry on his shoulders. Tia had seemed excited too. They'd painted the room a soft, hopeful yellow. Calix had assembled a beautiful oak crib that cost $800, and on the changing table, Tia had placed a $199 Nanit baby monitor. "It's the best one," she'd said. "It tracks their breathing. We can watch from our phones." But the years passed, and the timing was never right for Tia. First, it was a big project at the nonprofit where she volunteered. Then, it was planning a major fundraising gala. The nursery became a storage room for her online shopping returns. The crib gathered dust. The baby monitor, however, remained. One day, after they got their beagle, Buster Tia had a clever idea. "Let's put the monitor in the living room," she'd suggested. "We can check on Buster when we're out." Calix had agreed, mounting the small white camera high on a bookshelf. Its unblinking eye aimed at the expensive white sofa. The Nanit app, with its push notifications and cloud storage, remained on his phone, a forgotten relic of a future that never arrived. He had no idea it was about to become the primary witness to the demolition of his past. The world outside the tinted windows of Calix's Ford F-150 was still waking up. He had driven on autopilot to a small, unofficial lookout point by the Industrial Canal, a place where port workers sometimes came to eat their lunch and watch the massive ships navigate the narrow waterway. The sun was a pale, hazy disk behind the morning humidity. He cut the engine. The silence in the cab was absolute, a stark contrast to the screaming chaos in his head. The shoes, the brown Cole Haans. They were so specific, so mundane, and yet so utterly catastrophic. They weren't kicked off in a hurry. They were placed neatly on the shoe rack, as if their owner belonged there, as if he had every right to be there. Calix felt a cold wave of nausea. He hadn't gone inside. He hadn't stormed up the stairs. His first, overriding instinct was a strange, chilling calm. It was the same feeling he got in the crane cab when a sudden gust of wind caught a container and it started to sway. You don't panic. Panic gets people killed. You breathe, you focus, you assess the situation, you regain control. He pulled his phone from his pocket. His fingers felt thick and clumsy. His hands, which could so delicately maneuver a multi-ton steel box, were trembling. He ignored the missed call from his conference liaison in Houston. He ignored the text from his buddy asking about the Astros game. He scrolled through the pages of apps, his thumb hovering for a moment over Tia's icon, her smiling face in a selfie from their last vacation to the Florida Keys. He kept scrolling until he found it, the small white icon with a blue one, the Nanit app. He tapped it. The app opened, a relic of a life he'd thought they were building. He'd forgotten his password, but his phone had it saved. After a moment, a loading screen gave way to a live video feed. The image was grainy in the low morning light, but unmistakable. It was his living room, the $6,000 white leather sofa, the $2,000 red slash painting. The morning sun was just starting to filter through the plantation shutters. The room was still and quiet, but the app wasn't just video, it was audio. It was always listening. His thumb, moving with a will of its own, tapped the Activity tab. A timeline appeared. It was a log of every sound and motion the camera had detected. 6:34 a.m., sound detected. 6:21 a.m., sound detected. 5:45 a.m., motion detected. His heart hammered against his ribs. He could go back. He could listen. With a deep, shuddering breath, he pressed play on the most recent event from just a few minutes ago. The timestamp was 6:34 a.m. He heard the faint sound of his own truck's engine as he had pulled away from the house. Then, a new sound. A man's voice, thick with sleep. What was that? Tia's voice. Sugary sweet? But with an edge of annoyance he now recognized as her default tone when speaking about anything that inconvenienced her. Probably just the garbage truck, baby. Go back to sleep. Baby. She had called this stranger Baby, the same pet name she used for Calix. It was a small thing, but it felt like a razor blade sliding under his skin. You sure? The man's voice, Devontae's voice, though Calix didn't know his name yet, mumbled. Sounded close? I'm sure, Tia said, her voice softening, becoming seductive. Don't worry. My husband, the big, dumb crane operator, is 100 miles away, listening to some boring speech. He's at the conference till Friday. We have all the time in the world. The big, dumb crane operator. The words landed like body blows. He couldn't breathe. It wasn't just the cheating. It was the contempt, the casual, dismissive cruelty. This was how she saw him. This was what she said about him when she thought he couldn't hear. The man who paid the $750,000 mortgage. The man whose retirement savings had been pillaged for the down payment. The man who worked 60 hours a week in a dangerous job to fund her collection of Burberry coats and abstract art. He was the big dumb crane operator. A cold, terrifying clarity washed over him. The shock and the hurt were still there, a raging inferno in his chest, but something else was being forged in that fire. A quiet, methodical resolve. He wasn't going to storm back to the house. He wasn't going to scream and break things. That's what the big dumb crane operator would do. That's what they expected. No. He was going to sit here in his paid-for truck, overlooking the murky waters of the industrial canal, and he was going to listen. He was going to become an archaeologist of his own ruin, carefully digging through the layers of lies, one audio file at a time. He tapped on the screen, scrolling back. An hour, a day, a week. The app had a cloud storage subscription, the premium one Tia had insisted on, for $99 a year. For the memories, she'd said. It stored everything, every sound, every motion, for months. He had a year of betrayal cataloged and waiting for him. He pressed play on an entry from the night before, and he began to listen to the sound of his world being dismantled, piece by piece. The next 48 hours were a descent into a surreal, private hell. Calix didn't go home. He didn't go to a hotel. He drove west, out of the city, and found a nondescript 24-hour diner off I-10. He sat in a corner booth, the cracked red vinyl sticking to his skin, and ordered black coffee. With his earbuds in, the phone resting on the sticky tabletop, he began his grim excavation. The diner's fluorescent lights hummed, casting a pale, sickly glow on his face. His deep brown skin, usually warm and vibrant, looked ashen. He was a ghost, haunting the edges of his own life, listening to the party he was never invited to. The audio files were a litany of casual cruelty and breathtaking arrogance. He started with the night before, Tuesday. He'd called her around 9 p.m. from Houston, just before he'd made the decision to drive home. He remembered the conversation vividly. He'd been lonely in his $289 a night room at the Hyatt, staring out at the Houston skyline. She'd sounded so loving, so concerned. "Are you eating right, baby? Don't work too hard, I miss you." Now he listened to the audio from 5 minutes after he hung up. Was that him? Devontae's voice, smug, confident. Yeah, Tia sighed, a theatrical, put-upon sound. The nightly check-in? God, he's so predictable. What did you tell him? The usual. I miss you. I love you. The house is so empty without you, she said, her voice mocking her own words. They both laughed. It was a shared, intimate laugh. The kind of laugh Calix hadn't heard from her in years. He eats it up. He thinks this life we have just happened. He has no idea what it takes to maintain this. The networking, the parties. He'd rather be at some grimy bar with his port friends. Hey, I like grimy bars, Devontae joked. Not the way he does, Tia said, her voice turning sharp. He thinks a good time is a $10 pitcher of beer in a Saints game. He has no ambition. He's content to be a glorified forklift driver for the rest of his life. If it weren't for me, we'd still be living in that dump in the Bywater. Calix put the phone face down on the table. A waitress came by and refilled his cup. "You okay, honey? You look like you've seen a ghost." "Something like that," he mumbled. A glorified forklift driver, he who could thread a 50-ton container through a gap with inches to spare 200 feet in the air in a 30-mile-per-hour crosswind. He whose salary paid for the very roof they were laughing under. The disrespect was a physical thing, a sour taste in his mouth. He kept scrolling back, a digital archaeologist unearthing his own cuckolding. He found the audio from the day he left for Houston, Monday morning. He remembered kissing her goodbye at 5 a.m. She'd been warm and sleepy, clinging to him. "Be safe, baby. Call me when you get there." The monitor picked up the sound of his truck pulling away. He listened, his stomach in knots, for what came next. He didn't have to wait long. Less than 10 minutes after he was gone, he heard the sound of her phone dialing. "Hey," she said, her voice bright and awake now. "He's gone. The conference is till Friday. The house is all ours." There was a pause. "I know, just get over here. I'm already lonely." Calix felt a cold fury settle deep in his bones. The affair wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a one-time thing. It was a coordinated, tactical operation. His work schedule, his travel, his predictable nature, they weren't features of his life. They were vulnerabilities she and her lover exploited. His trips to conferences in Long Beach, Savannah, Baltimore. How many times had this happened? How long had this been going on? He scrolled back and back and back. Weeks turned into months. The evidence was overwhelming, a tidal wave of betrayal. He heard them planning weekends away while he was on 24-hour shifts. He heard them laughing about a cheap bottle of wine he'd brought home, a bottle he thought was fancy. He heard them discussing finances. Their finances. "We need to get Tia's name on the deed to her mother's house," Devante said in a recording from 3 months ago. "If anything ever happens with Calix, you need to have your own assets, completely separate." "I know," Tia fretted, "but my mom is so old-fashioned. She put Calix's name on it, too, when we helped her with the roof. Said he's a good, steady man." They both scoffed. "We'll work on her," Devante said smoothly. "In the meantime, you need to be putting more aside. That little account we opened, you need to feed it. Every time he gives you cash for groceries, you skim 100. He'll never notice." Calix's blood ran cold. The secret account. The skimming. This wasn't just an affair. This was a conspiracy. A long-term financial and emotional fraud. He felt a strange sense of detachment, as if he were watching a movie about someone else's life. The pain was immense, a vast, dark ocean inside him. But on the surface, there was only ice. The most damning conversation, the one that broke what was left of his heart, was from 6 months ago. He'd been on a trip to a port in Virginia for a week. The audio was late at night. They were drinking wine. He could hear the clink of glasses. "Do you ever feel guilty?" Devante asked. It was the first time Calix had heard a single note of anything other than smug confidence in the man's voice. Tia was silent for a long moment. Calix leaned forward, straining to hear. "Sometimes," she admitted, her voice low. "He's a good man. He's simple. He loves me, in his way. He provides. He fixes things. He's reliable like a good appliance." A good appliance. "But I want more than that," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "I want passion. I want someone who challenges me, who gets my world. Calix. Calix thinks a perfect evening is watching a football game. He doesn't understand art. He doesn't understand culture. He doesn't understand me. Loving him is like living in a beautiful house that's always a little too cold. You're the one who makes me feel warm, Dev." Calix switched off the phone. He couldn't listen anymore. a good appliance, a simple man, the big dumb crane operator. It was all the same thing. He was functional, reliable, and ultimately disposable. He had been a resource to be exploited, a foundation for a life she wanted to live with another man. All the expensive furniture, the art, the parties. It wasn't for them. It was for her. He was just the funding source, the inconvenient but necessary infrastructure. He stood up, leaving a $10 bill on the table for the coffee. He walked out of the diner into the bright, unforgiving light of Wednesday afternoon. The inferno of pain was still there, but now it was fueling an engine. A cold, quiet, meticulous engine of justice. He was no longer a husband. He was an operator. And he was about to execute the most precise, most controlled, most devastating maneuver of his life. The target was his own life. The payload was the truth. And the collateral damage was not going to be his. The facade had to be maintained. This was the first rule of his new, grim reality. Any deviation from his normal routine would alert Tia, would give her time to prepare, to hide, to spin a narrative. He couldn't allow that. The element of surprise, which he had once hoped to use for a romantic gesture, would now be weaponized for a strategic strike. He drove to a cheap motel on the outskirts of Metairie, a place with peeling paint and a flickering neon sign that promised color TV. It cost him $79 a night. Cash. The room smelled of stale smoke and bleach. It was a universe, away from the $750,000 home in the Garden District. But it was safe. It was anonymous. It was his command center. The first order of business was the phone call. He had to call Tia. It was Wednesday evening, the time he usually called after the first full day of the conference. His heart hammered against his ribs as he dialed her number. He practiced his voice in the empty room. "Hey, babe." Too high, he cleared his throat. "Hey, babe." Too gruff. He took a deep breath, picturing himself in the crane cab, talking to the foreman on the radio, calm, clear, professional. She picked up on the second ring. "Calix, I was just thinking about you." Her voice was a symphony of feigned affection, each note perfectly pitched. He could hear the faint sound of a television in the background. "Hey, babe," he said, his voice miraculously steady. "Just checking in. Long day." "Oh, I bet. Is it terribly boring?" she asked, a hint of laughter in her voice. The irony was a physical blow. "You have no idea," he said. "The double meaning of private, bitter satisfaction. Just a lot of talk about logistics and supply chains. My brain is fried." "Aw, my poor baby," she cooed. "Well, you just have 2 more days. I'm counting the minutes until you're home. The house is so empty without you." The lie was so effortless, so practiced. He felt a dizzying wave of dissociation, as if he were floating above the scene. He was in a grimy motel room, listening to his wife lie to him from their home, where she was likely sitting with her lover, the man whose shoes had been in their entryway that very morning. "I miss you too," he said. The words tasted like ash. "I'm probably just going to grab some room service and crash. Got an early start tomorrow." "Good. Get some rest. I love you," she said. "Love you too," he replied, and hung up. He leaned his head back against the cheap, particle board headboard and let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding for a full minute. The first lie was over. He had performed his role as the big, dumb crane operator successfully. She suspected nothing. Next, he turned his attention to the evidence. The audio files were a start. A powerful, damning start. But he needed more. He needed a narrative. He needed a timeline. He needed numbers. He opened his laptop, a sturdy $500 Dell he'd bought for taking online certification courses for the port, and connected to the motel's spotty Wi-Fi. He logged into their joint bank account. For years, he'd let Tia manage the day-to-day finances. "You're so busy, baby," she'd say. "Just let me handle it." He'd been grateful. Now he saw it for what it was, a strategic move to control the flow of information. He started at the present and worked his way back month by month. He opened a spreadsheet. The patterns emerged quickly. Every time he was out of town for a conference, Long Beach in February, Savannah in May, Baltimore in September, there was a series of suspicious expenditures. A $450 charge at Commander's Palace, a restaurant they only went to for their anniversary. He checked the date. He was in Baltimore. There were charges for spas, always for 2 people, an $800 charge at the Windsor Court Spa for a couples package. He cross-referenced the date with the Nanit audio. He found a clip from that evening, Tia and Devante laughing about the snooty hotel staff. He found weekly cash withdrawals, always for $500, always from an ATM near Tia's favorite yoga studio. He'd always assumed it was for groceries and incidentals. Now he remembered Devante's voice from the audio. "Every time he gives you cash for groceries, you skim 100, he'll never notice." He started a new column in his spreadsheet. Suspected misappropriated funds. The number grew at an alarming rate. There were Venmo transactions disguised with innocent emojis. A wine glass emoji for a $200 payment to a woman he didn't know. He looked her up. She was a sommelier who did private tastings. Another charge for $1,000 to a man with a paintbrush emoji. An artist. Tia was funding a lifestyle, not just for herself but for Devante using Calix's money. She was curating a world for her lover, using her husband's paycheck as her budget. He worked through the night, fueled by black coffee from the motel's ancient machine. Each transaction was a small betrayal, a piece of a much larger, uglier puzzle. The $2,000 painting, the $5,000 Peloton. He started to see them not as extravagant purchases, but as assets in her new life. Things she planned to take with her. By Thursday morning, the sun was streaming through the gap in the cheap curtains. His eyes were gritty with lack of sleep, but his mind was sharp. He had a spreadsheet with dates, times, dollar amounts, and cross-references to audio files. It was a meticulous, irrefutable chronicle of a year-long fraud. The total in the misappropriated funds column was $47,280. The number was obscene. It was more than half his annual salary, pissed away on wine tastings, spa days, and dinners for his wife and her boyfriend. The big, dumb crane operator had been funding the party all along, and he had the receipts to prove it. The second phase of the operation required a professional. Calix knew how to move containers, not navigate the labyrinth of family law. He needed a shark. He spent Thursday morning researching. He didn't search for divorce lawyer. He searched for New Orleans' most ruthless litigator. The same name kept coming up, Alexandria Broussard. Her website was sleek and intimidating. Her picture showed a sharp-featured black woman in her late 40s with intelligent eyes that seemed to see right through you. Her hair was a crown of elegant silver-streaked locks. Her bio was filled with phrases like high-asset dissolution and forensic financial analysis. Her firm was in a glass tower on Poydras Street. Her billing rate, he discovered after a bit more digging, was a staggering $1,200 per hour. It was more money than he'd ever imagined spending on anything other than a house or a medical emergency. But this was both. It was a demolition and an extraction. He needed the best operator. He used a burner phone app, a $5 purchase, to make the call. He didn't want the number logged on his main phone's records. A crisp, professional voice answered. "Broussard and Associates." "Yes, I'd like to schedule a consultation with Ms. Broussard," Calix said, his voice calm. "Ms. Broussard's schedule is quite full. Are you a current client?" "No," Calix said, "but it's a matter of some urgency. It involves infidelity, significant financial fraud, and a substantial amount of digital evidence. There was a pause on the other end of the line. He could almost hear the gears turning. He had used the right words. "Please hold," the voice said. A minute later, another voice came on the line. It was smoother, deeper, radiating a kind of lethal confidence. "This is Alexandria Broussard. You have my attention for 5 minutes. Talk to me." Calix laid it out, quickly, precisely, like a foreman giving a pre-lift briefing. He gave his name, his wife's name, the value of their home, his salary, the length of the marriage. He mentioned the conference in Houston. He mentioned the brown Cole Haan shoes. He mentioned the Nanite baby monitor. "You have audio?" Broussard asked, her voice sharpening with interest. "I have a year's worth of it," Calix replied. "Cloud-stored, time-stamped. I also have a spreadsheet detailing approximately $47,000 in misappropriated marital funds, cross-referenced with the audio." The silence on the other end was profound. It was the silence of a predator that has just spotted a particularly slow, fat wildebeest. "Mr. Washington," she said, her voice dripping with something that sounded like admiration, "cancel your afternoon. I'm clearing my calendar. My assistant will send you a link for a video call at 2 p.m. and a retainer agreement. The retainer is $25,000. Calix didn't even flinch. "I'll have it paid within the hour." "I have a feeling," Alexandria Broussard said, a hint of a smile in her voice, "that you and I are going to do great things together." The video call was like being expertly field-dressed. Ms. Broussard appeared on his laptop screen, framed by a panoramic view of the New Orleans skyline from her corner office. She wore an $8,700 Armani suit. She was all business. "Let's begin, Mr. Washington. Walk me through it, from the beginning." For the next hour, Calix told her everything. He shared his screen, showing her the spreadsheet. He played her a few choice audio clips. Tia, calling him a big dumb crane operator. The conversation about the secret bank account. The good appliance comment. Broussard listened without interruption, her face an unreadable mask, but he could see a glint in her eyes. It was the look of a master craftsman admiring a rare piece of material. When he was finished, she leaned back in her chair. "Mr. Washington, this is not a divorce case. This is a corporate dissolution. Your wife has been operating a hostile entity within your shared life, systematically embezzling funds and assets. The infidelity is, from a legal standpoint, the least interesting part of this. It's the color. The financial fraud, backed by this level of irrefutable, time-stamped evidence, it's the kill shot." She laid out the strategy. It was cold, precise, and brutal. "We file on Friday morning. The petition will include a motion for exclusive use of the marital home, based on her adulterous conduct within it. We will attach a summary of your financial analysis as Exhibit A. We will attach a photograph of the shoes as Exhibit B. And we will attach a USB drive with a curated 48 hours of audio as Exhibit C. We will serve her at the house at 9:15 a.m. By 9:30, her world will have ended. She just won't know it yet." She gave him homework. He was to go to a print shop and get a high-quality 8x10 glossy photograph of the picture he'd taken of the Cole Haan shoes. He was to go to an electronics store and buy a brand new USB drive. He was to spend the rest of the day and night curating the audio files. The most damning, most contemptuous, most financially incriminating clips. "I want a highlight reel of her disdain," Broussard instructed. "I want the judge to feel personally insulted on your behalf." He had to call Tia one more time that evening to maintain the fiction. "Hey, babe," he said, his voice a perfect imitation of a weary traveler. "Hey, how was your day?" She chirped. "More the same. I'm so ready to be home." "Me too. I'm going to make your favorite on Friday night. red beans and rice. The thought of her in his kitchen, cooking for him, after everything he now knew, was so grotesque it was almost funny. "Sounds great, babe," he said. "Looking forward to it." He hung up and got to work. He was a man with a mission. He was no longer Calix Washington husband. He was Alexandria Broussard's newest, most promising associate, preparing the case of a lifetime. His own. Friday morning broke over New Orleans with a fragile, pearlescent light. Calix had not slept. He had spent the night in his $79 motel room, meticulously editing audio files, creating a symphony of his own destruction. He had isolated the cruelest remarks, the most blatant financial plotting, the most intimate moments between Tia and Devante. He arranged them chronologically, a 2-hour highlight reel of his life's biggest failure. Listening to it was an act of profound self-punishment, but with each clip he saved, a layer of grief was replaced by a layer of cold, hard resolve. This was not about emotion anymore. This was about data. At 7 a.m., he showered and dressed. He didn't put on his usual work jeans. He put on the one good suit he owned, the $700 charcoal gray suit he'd bought for his father's funeral. He looked at himself in the motel's cheap, warped mirror. The man looking back was thinner, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. But he stood straighter. The big, dumb crane operator was gone. In his place was a man who understood the precise application of overwhelming force. He met Alexandria Broussard at 8 a.m., sharp in the lobby of the civil courthouse. She was a vision of intimidating elegance in a navy blue power suit that probably cost $4,000. She gave him a single, appraising nod. "You look ready, Mr. Washington." "I am," he said. His voice was steady. In her hand, she held a thick file folder. She handed him a pen. "Sign here, here, and here." He signed the divorce petition. He initialed the motion for exclusive use of the family home. He signed the affidavit attesting to the authenticity of the evidence. His signature was firm, unwavering. He handed the folder back to her. Tucked inside was the glossy 8x10 photograph of the brown Cole Haan shoes, looking obscene in their clarity. Also inside was the small black USB drive, loaded with $47,000 worth of betrayal. "The process server is on standby," she said, checking her watch, a gold Cartier that was likely worth more than his truck. "He's a very large, very stoic man named Frank. He will arrive at your house at exactly 9:15 a.m. I have instructed him to wait until your wife physically takes the documents into her hands. Once she is served, I will file this petition electronically. It will be time-stamped. There will be no ambiguity." She put a hand on his arm, her first and only gesture of personal contact. "Now comes the hard part, Calix. The silence. Your phone is going to explode. You will not answer. You will not respond to texts. You will not engage. You are a ghost. All communication goes through me. Do you understand?" "Yes," he said. "Good," she nodded, her professional mask back in place. "Go get some coffee. I'll text you when it's done." Calix walked out of the courthouse into the bright morning. He didn't go for coffee. He drove his F-150 to the Garden District, parking it several blocks away from his own home, under the shade of a massive live oak tree. He couldn't stay away. He needed to be near the blast zone. He sat in the cab of his truck, the engine off, and watched the second hand on his $89 Timex watch. At 9:14 a.m., a plain, dark blue sedan he didn't recognize pulled up and parked across the street from his house. A very large, very stoic man got out. Frank. He was wearing a simple polo shirt and slacks. He walked up the brick path to the front door and rang the bell. Calix held his breath. The door opened. It was Tia. Even from a block away, he recognized her silhouette. She was wearing one of her expensive silk robes, a gift from him for her last birthday that had cost $150. Frank said something, holding out the thick envelope. Tia looked confused, then took it. Frank nodded, turned, and walked back to his car. He drove away. The strike was complete. The payload had been delivered. Calix looked at his phone, which he had placed on the passenger seat. It was 9:17 a.m. It was silent. 9:18. Silence. 9:19. He imagined her in the foyer, tearing open the envelope. He pictured her eyes scanning the legal jargon. He pictured her seeing the photograph. At 9:22 a.m., the phone lit up. Incoming call, Tia. He let it ring. It rang and rang and rang, then went to voicemail. Seconds later, a text message appeared on the screen. What is this? Another call. He ignored it. Another text. Calix, call me right now. This is a sick joke. And another. You're filing for divorce? Are you insane? The phone began to buzz incessantly. A string of texts, one after another, a digital torrent of panic and disbelief. What is Exhibit B? A USB drive? What is on this thing? You're trying to kick me out of my own house? Our house? My lawyer? What the hell is going on? Alexandria Broussard? Calix? She's a monster. He watched the messages scroll by, feeling nothing but a profound, chilling emptiness. The woman texting him was a stranger. The life she was fighting for was a television show he'd been watching from the next room. Then, the tone shifted. The anger gave way to dawning horror, then to pleading. The audio, you spied on me? You bastard. Okay, I messed up. I know. But we can talk about this. Please, baby. We can talk about this. Don't do this. Calix, please answer me. I'm scared. I'm sorry, okay? I'm so sorry. Just come home and we can fix this. You're destroying our lives over one mistake. That was the one. The one that made him let out a short, bitter laugh. One mistake. He thought of the spreadsheet. He thought of the year of audio files. He thought of Devante. He wondered if Devante had been there when Frank arrived. He wondered if he was there now, reading the messages over her shoulder. The brown Cole Hans, already by the back door, ready for a quick escape. A text came in from Alexandria Broussard. Filed and confirmed. Welcome to your new life, Mr. Washington. Calix started his truck. He didn't look back at the house as he pulled away. He was driving toward a future he couldn't yet imagine, leaving behind the smoking crater of a life that was no longer his. The big, dumb crane operator had finally brought the whole damn structure down. The fallout was swift and catastrophic, a controlled demolition executed with surgical precision. Alexandria Broussard's opening salvo was so overwhelming, so thoroughly documented, that Tia's legal response was a flailing, desperate scramble. Her hastily hired lawyer, a man whose entire practice seemed to be advertised on city bus benches for a flat fee of $1,999, was completely outmatched. He was a rowboat against a battleship. The first consequence was the house. Broussard's motion for exclusive use was granted at an emergency hearing the following week. The judge, a stern-faced woman who had seen everything, read the summary of the evidence, glanced at the photograph of the shoes, and listened to a 60-second audio clip of Tia and Devante mocking Calix's job. She didn't need to hear more. The ruling was immediate. Tia was given 30 days to vacate the $750,000 property. She was permitted to take only her personal belongings, a list to be approved by Calix's legal team. Every piece of furniture, every piece of art she had so carefully curated, was deemed a marital asset purchased with marital funds. It stayed. The second consequence was financial. Broussard's initial settlement offer was not a negotiation. It was a surrender document. It stated, in no uncertain terms, that due to the egregious and sustained pattern of financial fraud, Calix would be retaining 100% of his retirement accounts, which, after 15 years of diligent 15% contributions, totaled over $400,000. He would retain 100% of the equity in the house. Tia, in turn, would be entitled to none of it. Furthermore, the offer stipulated that Tia was to repay her half of the documented $47,280 in misappropriated funds. Her lawyer protested, calling it draconian. Broussard responded by threatening to depose Devante, as well as every spa manager, restaurant owner, and art dealer on the spreadsheet, a move that would be both humiliating and legally devastating for Tia. The protest was quickly withdrawn. The third consequence was Devante. His name, which Calix finally learned from the legal filings, was Devante Miller. When Tia, in a panic, turned to the man she had called her passion, he evaporated like morning mist. He was, as it turned out, a bartender at a trendy cocktail lounge with $50,000 in student loan debt and a shared apartment in a less fashionable part of town. The life of sophisticated leisure he had enjoyed with Tia was entirely funded by Calix. Once that funding was cut off, so was his interest. He blocked her number. He vanished from social media. The man for whom Tia had risked everything was a mirage, and when the money dried up, he disappeared. His brown Cole Haan shoes, Calix imagined, were already walking toward their next target. The fourth consequence was social. The story, in its brutal, specific detail, leaked out. The Garden District is a small world, and gossip travels faster than the streetcar. The narrative was not one of a simple affair. It was the story of the quiet, hard-working crane operator and the ambitious, cheating wife, who called him an appliance. Sympathy, universally, fell with Calix. The precision of his strike, the quiet dignity with which he conducted himself, was seen as a sign of immense strength. Tia, on the other hand, was seen as both cruel and foolish. The friends who had once admired her expensive home and art collection now crossed the street to avoid her. The invitations to galas and gallery openings dried up. She was an outcast from the very world she had tried so hard to build, a world that, it turned out, was built on her husband's foundation. Tia's downfall was enumerated in a series of final, pathetic text messages sent to Calix before Broussard had her number blocked. She lost the house. She lost the money. She lost her social standing. She lost the lover who was never really hers. She was forced to move into a small, one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat, a place that cost $900 a month in rent. Her six-figure lifestyle, funded by deceit, had ended. She was left with nothing but her expensive clothes, which looked absurd in her new cramped reality, and the bill for her own betrayal. The consequences were not a punishment inflicted by Calix. They were simply the invoice for her own choices, delivered with cold, undeniable accuracy. 1 year later, the Louisiana sun beat down on the sprawling concrete expanse of the Port of New Orleans. From his perch, 200 feet in the air, inside the climate-controlled cab of his crane, Calix Washington watched the world move. Below him, a young woman in a hard hat and safety vest was directing a truck into position. Her name was Maya. She was 22, sharp as a tack, and the first recipient of the Washington Apprenticeship Grant, a program Calix had established with a portion of the money he no longer had to spend supporting a fraudulent lifestyle. He had endowed it with an initial $50,000. He watched as Maya gave the universal hand signal for all clear. She looked up at his crane and gave a thumbs up. He gave a short blast of the horn in acknowledgement, a sound of mutual respect that echoed across the container yard. He guided the spreader, the massive steel claw of the crane, down toward the container on the truck chassis. His hands moved on the joysticks with an economy of motion, a practiced grace. He thought of Tia's comment, the one that had once felt like a knife in his heart. A glorified forklift driver. She was wrong. This wasn't simple. It was a complex three-dimensional dance of physics, engineering, and instinct. It required focus, precision, and a deep understanding of the forces at play. It was a skill. It was a craft, and it was his. He was proud of the work he did, of the small, vital role he played in the great, flowing river of global commerce. That evening, he drove home not to a place of tension and lies, but to a sanctuary. The house in the Garden District was quieter now. He had sold off all of Tia's expensive, uncomfortable furniture and replaced it with solid, comfortable pieces he'd bought from a local craftsman. A sturdy oak dining table that cost $2,000. A deep leather armchair that had set him back $1,200. The walls, once adorned with art he didn't understand, now held framed blueprints of historic ships and beautiful, large-format photographs of the Louisiana wetlands. The infamous red-slash painting had been the first thing to go, sold to a collector for a surprising $3,000, which he had immediately donated to the apprenticeship fund. The house was his again. It was no longer a stage for someone else's performance. It was a home. He spent his evenings on the porch, reading, listening to the clatter of the St. Charles streetcar in the distance. He learned to cook, moving beyond just red beans and rice. He found a simple pleasure in the process, in nourishing himself with honest food. On weekends, he took long walks. He'd park his truck and just wander, exploring the city he had lived in his whole life but had never really seen. His favorite walk was down Magazine Street. He'd browse in the antique shops, grab a coffee at a local cafe, and just watch the life of the city swirl around him. He was a man at peace, comfortable in his own skin, in his own silence. He had lost a wife, but he had found himself. The trade, he now knew, was a bargain. He learned through the grapevine that Tia had moved to Atlanta trying to start over. He felt no anger toward her anymore, no bitterness. He felt only a kind of distant pity. She had been chasing a fantasy, a life she saw in magazines, and had destroyed the real, solid life she already had in the process. He hoped she found some kind of peace, but he knew it was no longer his concern. He had forgiven her, not for her sake, but for his. Forgiveness was the final act of letting go, the last container to be lifted and set aside, leaving his own deck clear for the journey ahead. We think that wealth is something we can buy, something we can display. We measure it in square footage, in designer labels, in the price of the art on our walls. We chase a life that looks good on the outside, a facade of success for others to admire. But a foundation built on lies will always crumble. True wealth isn't in a $750,000 house or a $2,400 coat. It's in the integrity of your work, the loyalty of your heart, and the quiet dignity of a life lived with honor. It's the kind of wealth that can't be embezzled or stolen. It's the solid ground you build for yourself, one honest day's work at a time. That is a structure that will stand forever. What do you think is the true measure of a person's wealth? Let us know in the comments below.